Dr. Taylor is here to provide information on this and set up a discussion for the board on attendance and truancy issues by board request. And this, he can speak to Christina's things as well, I believe. Is she still out for a bit? Okay, so she's excused.
Before we get started too, board member Bade can't make the study session, but said he'll be at the open meeting, and Charlotte is on her way.
Okay.
She had to get started without her. Dr. Taylor, it's all you.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Speaking to the mic, Sam, or can I move? Yes. If you want to move. That's all right. I'll follow directions. What you'll find is a collection of information that deals with our student attendance and truancy interventions that are taking place within the district. Our learning goals, we want to deepen our shared knowledge and understanding of Salt Lake City School District's attendance data and procedures. Am I moving too fast? Let me know if I go to talking too fast. We good?
Yeah, just, you can even speed through this, because I know the board has had a chance to read it, so.
But we understand that we have four major terms in terms of us addressing truancy, chronic absenteeism, excused absences, and unexcused absences. The difference is truancy is when a child is absent and exceeds a certain amount, but is not excused. Chronic absenteeism covers all absences, whether excused or unexcused. Then you have the listing for some examples for what would be excused absences: illness, behavior, health concerns, family event, observance of a religious holiday, 14 that are recognized. Unexcused absences are when you out unexcused without a valid reason. In March of 2021 through June of 2022, there was a moratorium on schools taking any truancy enforcement action. Before I got here, this took place, and it was here for my first year. But when you look at our interactions with teachers as well as staff, you would have thought this has been in place for 4 or 5 years. This was really a short span, of 1 year, that we had this in place. On May 3rd, 2023, the language preventing truancy enforcement was removed from the Controlling Utah Code provisions. That's HB 304. Misconceptions about Winston and the SRO agreements. There is no mention of truancy or attendance in the 2016 settlement agreement in the matter of Kevin Winston on behalf of his minor son, KW, et al., versus Salt Lake City Police Department, et al. Our SRO agreements indicate that when the SRO becomes aware of truancy issues, the SRO shall refer the conduct to the principal and any designated school administrator for appropriate action. The purpose of this provision was to make sure that any type of statutory mandated intervention had been implemented before any referrals or citations were issued. Preventive in nature versus punitive.
Can I ask a quick question? I guess, and that may be procedurally the protocol, but wouldn't the principal be evaluating their own school to see if there are such issues happening before an SRO's bringing it to their attention, or?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it, what happens more often, the principal's identifying the problem and trying to resolve it, or the SRO?
The principal will be reviewing the school's data, which will indicate it on a regular basis. But the SRO might come in interaction with an individual child and become aware of it, and that way bring it to the principal's attention. The principal should already know it, but this really just clarifies the process, making sure that SROs don't have any type of burden to act on it.
I have a question for you about that, Dr. Taylor. The misconception I hear is that faculty hear from their administrators that they are not allowed to refer truancy that's happening on campus to an SRO. So if students at West are doing drugs in the bathroom during the class period, that is considered truant, right? Or not habitually truant, but you're absent from class, you're not where you're supposed to be. It's the understanding of some administrators and some faculty that they are not allowed in such an instance to call the SRO. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, you shouldn't have a SRO doing school-based discipline. They're there for the enforcement of laws or an infraction of the law in and of itself as a resource. the principal, the administration, the teachers should be addressing those matters, respective within those buildings.
And this question might be for actually our general counsel, who you said isn't here yet, that the question is about if they're only allowed to refer for violence and not allowed to refer for drug use or drug distribution that's taking place in the bathroom during the school day. Does that make sense? I think that is the central confusion that faculty have, is can an administrator refer to an SRO drug use and drug distribution that is taking place in the bathroom that is a cause of truancy?
Here she comes.
I'll defer to her if she's coming through the door.
Oh, no.
Just in time, she's got a question for you.
You're up there. I'm not getting up there. I'm sorry to see the boot. What I was hoping to clarify is that the misunderstanding of administrators and faculty of how to refer truant students who are abusing or distributing drugs during the school day in the bathroom. So in the Winston agreement, there's confusion about whether those things can be referred to SROs or not. And if they cannot be referred to SROs, what actions can a principal take if a student who is truant is using or distributing drugs during the school day?
So being on school property in the bathroom, but not in class.
Correct.
But using or distributing drugs. So it's completely two different issues, right? So being truant is a status offense that SROs are not gonna ticket initially. Truancy needs to go through the process that's outlined above, referring it to an administrator, hopefully taking it to the SSC, the internal committee, and working on creating an individualized plan for that student, implementing the interventions, like at least 3 that are in that list, doing the notices of truancy. For drugs, that's a different issue, right? Depending on whether or not they're vaping, whether or not it's illegal drugs, any type of unlawful drug use can be referred to SROs. In terms of vaping, which is a lot of what's going on, anytime that you have a vape, those should be confiscated and put in, like, you should confiscate those. Administrators need to confiscate those. They can't be returned to the student or the parent. They need to be put in the proper disposal mechanism. Vaping would tend to be handled internally. We have a process for referring to Insight for, is it Insight or what's it called?
It's Insight.
Insight for sort of those kinds of violations in terms of e-cigarettes. If it got bad, there's a specific process that's outlined in S3 to deal with vaping. Unlawful drugs, though, can definitely, if you're selling drugs, that can be immediately referred to the SRO.
Yeah, that's a violation of law.
Yeah. So in terms of, although being truant at some point, if you've been identified as truant, I think that's the issue, right? In terms of going through the process to actually identify that student as truant under the law and all the interim steps, that we aren't doing that involving an SRO. That should be handled through the administration and looked at in terms of interventions and how can we get it to the point that we don't need to do a criminal referral. But unlawful drugs can immediately be referred to an SRO.
So as a follow-up to that, when that's not happening and people don't believe it can happen, what are the steps that the district takes to meet our goal that I know is later in your presentation? And that's really not a question for you. That probably pivots back to you, right?
Yeah.
Because everything that I just heard said is not what I know to be occurring from parents and students and teachers. So I'm confused about how we get from where we are now to actually following the procedures that you've identified.
That's going to be the education process of doing professional learning. That's why I included an example within the packet of previous professional learning that's taken place in terms of dealing with attendance and the referrals for attendance. But yeah, we're going to have to educate and continuously do job-embedded professional development for our teachers and for our administrators.
Dr. Taylor, on that last one, could you also, that final bullet point, that the purpose of the provision was to ensure statutory mandated interventions have happened first. You're speaking to that a little bit more, or?
Yeah.
or
I
do you
wrote
wanna-
that.
Yeah, no, it was one that's such an important point that I would love some attention from either of you on it,
Okay,
on
so
what's required.
in terms of the Winston agreement and the follow-up SRO agreement that then, as some of you know who have been here for a long time, we were one of the first people, because of the Winston case, to have an SRO agreement. And then that became sort of embedded in code, and the state code outlined, what those agreements need to look like. And it's been very clear throughout our settlement agreements, as well as state code and all our SRO agreements, that SROs have a certain scope of authority, and administrators have a different scope of authority. And that the two really shouldn't meet, that SROs are not allowed to handle administrative or disciplinary matters, right? And so that's sort of what this provision was talking about, that truancy issues really are focused on attendance and that school family connection, and that those things first and foremost, unless we get to a complete referral down the road, that those things need to be handled by the administrator. And that the SRO, if the SRO is aware that a student is loitering, we have some trespass options, but they should be talking and working with administrators to say, hey, these kids aren't in class, I'm noticing these things, but the SRO should not be taking that action themselves. And then it goes to that list of statutorily mandated interventions that the principal needs to start implementing and creating that individualized plan.
I think as I remember it from that era, it was like an SR wouldn't walk into a classroom and confiscate a kid's cell phone. But when there were exigent circumstances, I remember that word from back in the day. So when a law was broken or a crime was committed is when the SRO would step in and intervene. Is that still the case?
So exigent circumstances are when there is an immediate risk to someone's life or safety,
Right.
when you think evidence is about to be destroyed, or when you're sort of in hot pursuit of a crime. Obviously, so I mean, it's hard to keep this in the idea of truancy and attendance, right? But typically with truancy, there's not gonna be ever an exigent circumstance, right? Like, truancy is
And I
an
think
exigent
and Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're getting at is that sometimes these two things are taking place at the same time.
Almost all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There-
so
that
the
now-
selling
because
of,
truancy used to be you leave the campus, and now people are truant on campus for a majority of the school day. And we have faculty who, parents can see on your device that your student was at the school building all day, so they don't understand why they were marked absent. We also don't have consistent procedures in all of our schools. I know that sometimes students are absent the entire day and they're not marked absent, in half their periods. So
so
it's-
they're sloughing their classes is
in,
basically.
at school.
Right.
Yes. So I think they're intersecting in a way that they have not previously. And this has caused confusion about how people are meant to deal with that, because the reasons for truancy are predominantly to stay at school.
Right, and I think we would have a truancy issue. It's a hard to prove truancy if they're checked as present, right? I mean, truancy goes to the fact that they have been marked absent, right? So if their attendance shows that they are present and they're simply sloughing in the bathroom or not attending class, that's a different issue, correct, Dr. Taylor?
That's correct. Because the data is only good as, well, let me say it a different way. When you look at the information that's being input, we have to depend on that for accuracy. So if someone's not checking attendance or not reporting their child as being absent from the class, we have no way of knowing it unless we physically catch the child somewhere.
And also that affects our ability to do a 5-day notice, a 10-day notice, to create the plan or to implement those interventions, because we aren't, or the school administrators aren't seeing that absence, those absences recorded.
What kind of in-school, I guess, audit could occur to ensure that teachers are appropriately marking kids like a present or absent? I mean, and I haven't really run into this with my son, because I love the AI attendance, by the way. As a parent, I get the Autobot, your son's missing school, what's the reason? Well, I don't know, let me find out. And it's really great, but I get these, like, he probably could be considered one of these right now. Well, he kind of is, I got the letter, but he's graduating in 2 weeks, so.
Full disclosure.
Well,
So ultimately, I guess that comes down to the people doing the input of that information the correct way, if they're aware. And kids can be creative, I get that. So figuring out a way to like make sure that it's properly recorded so that the issue can be properly addressed.
we have to monitor input through Power School and do periodic audits. So that's the process you'll hear us talk about toward the end of the presentation. So, and there's some preventive things as well as monitoring things we're looking at implementing and training people on. And you mentioned Sherpa, which is a pilot that we're running in 11 schools. That's not something that the district has fully embraced yet, but we're piloting it in terms of the AI response in order to see the effectiveness of it.
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how wonderful it is as a parent. It has been a game changer, just saying.
Add that to the anecdotes, Dr. Taylor.
What you find next is just simpler, the legal framework. You've reviewed it, you've seen this information before, so speed past these. When you look at policy S4, which is student attendance and exemption from school overview, and the goal here is to address absenteeism early with supportive, non-punitive measures. You'll hear that repeated over and over and over again. That each school must develop a plan to monitor and track attendance, develop appropriate interventions, and incentives to address absenteeism. Notice it's interventions and incentives. So how do you engage kids in the process? How do you incentivize attending school? Principals receive bi-quarterly attendance summary reports to identify chronically absent kids, and they work with the SEC to design individualized intervention plans for students, should have been
SLCSD, sorry. And that was my typo.
yeah, to work with students who are chronically absent.
I have a question about this. Some students are never marked as chronically absent because their parents excuse their absences, like a very large number of absences, which as we know, we can check the other box and you don't have to explain that you've gone on a 2-week vacation or whatever. What are schools meant to do or SSCs meant to do when students are never referred as chronically absent because their parents have excused a large number of
Now,
absences?
let me add a point of clarity. They wouldn't be referred as truant, but they would be referred as chronically absent. So even if the absence is excused, they still fall under chronic absenteeism. And each school should have plans and interventions based on the fact that the child has missed instruction. How is the child being exposed to that instruction, getting an avenue to make up that work or to make up that missed time for instruction? This is the one, when you look at state and district mandated interventions to address chronic absenteeism. If y'all want me to, I can go through them. But there are basically 10 interventions that are mandated that have to be followed. Now, can you enhance those and do additional things? Yes. But these are the minimal that you have to do.
How do we support schools in doing those?
Training, and more training. I guess that's the biggest way right now that we're looking to address. We'll know more as time progresses because we can't compartmentalize this. Attendance is interwoven through so many different things that it's not like we can just bring in somebody just to address attendance for teachers of schools. That's a process that has to be interwoven in the school climate and the school culture, that they understand that if you're missing school, you're missing something important.
Well, and to go along with what Ashley's asking there, this was something that I ran into last year, and I've kind of alluded to it previously. But whenever a child is struggling and not feeling engaged, and then you have the absenteeism, but then the teams are spread too thin with the more extreme, like at-risk kids, whether they're failing out or whatever it is. Like we have holes. So like you can train somebody 10 ways to Sunday, but if they have only got the bandwidth for, say, 8 kids, but there are 10 kids that need the support, you know, what are we doing to identify where our holes are so that we can, like, increase the engagement, we can support the kids, we can support the adults in the building. And that was kind of when I sent that email this morning, I think it was. One of my questions to Lisan was kind of taking this back a notch, and this is a component, I feel, that may be a contributing factor, is fleshing out the attendance and potentially chronic absenteeism of the teachers, paras, the administrators, the adults in the building, because I've had kids in classrooms where their teacher were absent like a significant amount of the school year, which contributes to disengagement, which contributes to attendance issues. So, like, you know, this is really focusing on the kids and what we need to do, but if we don't have the proper structures in place to facilitate the solutions, then the solutions are just words. Does that make sense? But, you know, not to obliterate your presentation, but I think that, you know, when we're talking about this, we kind of need to backpedal, and maybe it's future discussions, and really go, what's contributing to not being able to do these things that on paper they're great, but are they actually occurring?
Gotcha. But also I want to remind everybody with the board that we do what's called a comprehensive needs assessment on an annual basis. So if these things are emerging as major issues or barriers within schools, they will indicate to us that they need additional resources in these areas.
Which is great. My experience last year was pretty rough. So I'm just saying, sometimes
can we
there's
be
needs
proactive
that
and
can't
solicit
be,
information?
or aren't being supported at the building level.
Gotcha. Okay.
I guess I'm confused because when we looked at this attendance handbook and we made this a goal, there were district office staff designated to be working on this in the equity office. So that, has that workload not shifted to new personnel?
It has now?
Come July 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one of the things you're talking about. Sorry, I hear like a weird noise. Because I would just agree that if we say we're doing these procedures, but we don't actually have systems in place for schools to implement the procedures, we know that they're not able to at the scale. I mean, we have some schools on the table we've been given that are like almost a quarter of students are chronically absent. And then the presentation also says we haven't referred to truancy since 2020. So I don't love the idea of referring truancy in the sense that it's juvenile justice, but juvenile justice also at least provides support. When you don't go to school and you graduate, you're then referred to criminal justice with no supports. And so it's very concerning that schools do not feel that they can make truancy referrals. They don't know how to set up plans for people who are absent when the parents are excusing a very large number of absences. And we don't have a clear organizational structure of how schools would be supported in doing this. And also my last question would be, who receives the training that you mentioned as the step? Like, are we training specifically attendance secretaries? Are we training only principals and assistant principals? Who is the main receiver of the training in the materials that we've been given?
Principals, counselors, office staff that's responsible for attendance have all received direct training. But we operate on train the trainer model, so they're supposed to go back to their sites and replicate that training based on their needs. Well, we've seen the data. I listed the board goal, which was to reduce from 28% to 10% by 2029. As you see, this shows also our trend line, that since 2018, we've gone up. We peaked at 11.5%. We've seen a decrease from that. But as you mentioned earlier, we're looking at what type of things can we put in place through the school's culture to engage kids in the process in a non-punitive manner. How do we make it more viable? How do we engage them through things like student clubs, through extracurriculars, to make being in school valuable to them? This is chronic absenteeism. This is where you see that 28, 29% in terms of the goal coming in. and we're looking at being out of school for any reason, excused, unexcused. We're above both the state and the national average. When you look at being referred to the court system for truancy, we could not find evidence of anybody being referred. Sam, I'm gonna pick on Sam for a second. We even went into Power School and searched the term truancy just to see out of the log entries what would pop up. We had one example of a child popping up in terms of interventions being input into the system. I've been called in the last year by one principal in a consultation step, which the next step after that consultation, if the plan hadn't worked, would have been a referral to truancy. But the plan worked because the principal didn't call back. So that child started attending school. Questions?
Great job on helping that kid.
Brian?
This discussion seems to be really focused on high school. There's also a real challenge in elementary schools. And I think that those elementary schools need direction as well on how to address this. If you go and look at that chronic absenteeism rate, and if you look at the elementary schools, it's distressing. And to me, when you get in the habit of doing that in elementary school, it's just going to continue on. So one of the ways that we need to address this is in our elementary schools, and to have some sort of direction on how we approach that at that level. Speaking as a teacher, it was incredibly frustrating because you would see these children that were chronically absent, and there was, I'm being told, well, there's nothing we can do. And we need to know there's something we can do.
Do you know whether it's Dr. Taylor or Sam, because you pulled the data, did we compare it at all with other districts who are referring truancy? Okay, the reason I ask that is because whether it's elementary school, middle school, high school, whatever it is, if we've reported one student, maybe, you said 0, but like almost 1, other districts are reporting this. So it speaks to the overall issue of we have some type of system in place, but that system is not being utilized by our schools. And it's one tool that exists. And I think the reason this focused on secondary school is it is easier for families of young children on some level to make their kids attend school if they are choosing that, right? It is not easy for parents of high schoolers to compel their children to attend school, which is one of the reasons families ask about truancy referral, because truancy referral places constraints and supports for a student who is refusing to attend that a parent individually may not be able to do. So what are the intervening steps between reporting 0 and like what the average district is reporting in our state?
We can look at that information, see what we can solicit in terms of that, and then provide feedback. From the Title I survey that was did, we just simply pulled.
Brian?
Go ahead, sir.
I agree with your statement, Ashley, but I guess what I'm getting at is the challenge that there's also exists in elementary schools is there are parents that just, they're not that engaged in getting their children to school. And what do you do to encourage those parents to get their children to school? It's really heartbreaking when you have a child show up and say to you, I'm so sorry, Mr. Jensen, that I haven't been to school for the last week, but no one would bring me to school. Or I didn't have a way to get to school. Or we've got to remember that side of it as well.
Well, and in addition, it goes also to, you've got those scenarios which are extremely heartbreaking, and then you have scenarios where the kids don't want to go to the environment that they are being placed in for various reasons. And so being able to mitigate those contributing factors so the child actually feels either safe at the school or engaged at the school. So yeah, there's a lot of layers, but I'm there with you, elementary level, there's my kids dealt with several things through the years that I've had to kind of flush through to figure out how to re-engage in the process, so it wasn't a big ordeal in the mornings.
Right.
Well, based on the Title I survey that we did, 2 months ago, or roughly in that realm, when you look at the elementary staff concerns as well as middle school staff concerns, you'll see that inconsistent student attendance was the second issue. Well, no, I was number one on middle, sorry. Now, in terms of schools' responsibilities, this is where we're having the gaps emerge between what schools are responsible for and what's being implemented. Schools are required to monitor and document attendance trends. That means forecast based on the information that they're given, be able to say, what direction are we moving? Are we moving up, moving down? Create individualized plans for chronically absent students. Engage students and families proactively. Implement tiered interventions. We commonly say tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Issue formal notices, and then work with support services. Some examples of the tiered interventions: under tier 1, contact family, student check-in, make sure that the plan design is being implemented. Tier 2, at least they should have parent meeting, counseling referral, academic adjustments. That means academic plans put in place to help their child continuously engage in the academic process. Anytime they hit tier 3, ensure at least 3 interventions have been tried before issuing any type of truancy notice. If you issue the notice of truancy, offer mediation and refer to outside services.
I have a question. You stated that if parents were excusing a large number of absences, SSC would still engage in these interventions.
Yeah.
But this only indicates it's for unexcused absences. So how do schools know they're actually meant to follow this for students who are routinely excused by their parents?
But this I did for the presentation. When you look at the protocol, there's a protocol in the packet that reviews what steps the school should do for any child that's chronically absent. Oops, sorry. Oops. And I was referring back when you look at the tiered services for the school's responsibilities. What's the required documentation? Detailed attendance records, logs of all interventions and outcomes, copies of the notices sent, meeting summaries and parent communications, and that's where you get the summary report that comes to the district. These are the things that have to be done before the referral is made for truancy. You got a copy of the protocol that's in place. What we want to make sure is that schools are monitoring attendance and intervene early. They follow and document the tiered supports, issue the required notices, provide support and mediation, and prepare formal documentation for our referral. So there'll be times that in the future that if a school has not followed these steps, then we would have to refer back to the school and then provide those supports. There'll be times that we'll talk with them about what gaps have emerged through the process, but we want to make sure that at least we're meeting the minimums that's required statutorily. And we want to support student success and reduce court involvement. We want to review and disseminate the protocol template to school as next steps, train site-based attendance teams again, monitor fidelity of implementation, that's where the audits and reviews come into play, provide ongoing professional learning, professional development, and work with supporting agencies. That's the key step, too, is providing what we call wraparound services.
What do you mean when you say supporting agencies?
Whether it's a peer mediation, peer court, or if there's an outside agency that we can work with that will provide attendance interventions as a resource. I can't pull out individuals right now, I'm just talking about general areas.
There are some things too, when problems within the family are causing attendance problems too, that can be referred to outside agencies.
And right now, like we have the Sherpa pilot that's going on with attendance reporting. At East High School, we're working with United Way, Promise, Dream Builders, the Promise Partnership, in order to have student navigators and student success coaches in place, working with them, working with a set caseload of kids to encourage them to attend. We're doing small pilots throughout the district in order to see what programs work and can be scaled up.
Questions? Charlotte?
Yeah. For students who come mid-year, like students that are newcomers and they come into the schools during the year, are how do you handle that in terms of absences? You probably don't count the time they were not there.
No.
Right.
The only time the count starts when they're enrolled in school. So if they come at the middle of the year, the end of the year, we don't count those previous days. There's no punitive measures for that and no accounting for that.
Are you like prorating, so to speak? They're, so if they're, doing a full year, the chronic absenteeism rate is a certain number. But if they're coming in part of the year, that number should be adjusted to quantify it as a chronic absenteeism. So is that being done?
Yes, ma'am. We prorate according to percentages.
Well, I just wanted to mention that there are a lot of newcomers to our country who come to our schools in the middle of the year, and some of these students haven't had any schooling, or they've missed a lot of schooling while they were trying to get here. So it's a very difficult problem.
And we have a unique phenomenon that's kind of existed for the last couple of months. We have a portion of our population that's vulnerable, and because of some of the things that's in the news, we see attendance going up and attendance going down based on things that's being reported in the neighborhood or in the community.
Can you help me understand one more time what it takes to qualify as truant as compared to chronically absent?
Right, chronically absent, and I'm starting from the end. Chronically absent is any absence from the building, no matter excused or unexcused. If I could be a baseball player, a football player, and a soccer player, and I'm absent because of school-related activities, that's still chronically absent. How are we exposing those kids to the instruction that they're missing? How are we making that work up for them? How are we getting them access to those primary services? That's good examples. Now, truancy is unexcused absences. When you're out from school unexcused and you're missing, I want to say 20 days is the maximum. Not the maximum, the minimum to be referred to the state. So unexcused versus excused valid reasons.
How do we respond to the fact that children can excuse themselves using our current system?
They can still be chronically absent. They can, if they're 18 years old and excusing themselves, they still can fall within chronic absenteeism.
No, I mean, like, I could be 9 and I could excuse myself, as I know from personal experience. Because you can fill out an electronic form online, and if you know your parents' email address and your student ID, you're excused. This isn't a secret that I'm sharing. This is
Okay,
very
I'm with you.
well-known information.
Gotcha. Hopefully
Of
through
course, like, I could write a note for my parents in the 80s as well. Do you know what I understand this is not just linked to our procedures, but acknowledging that our procedures de facto allow children to excuse themselves, is that contributing to why we have not referred truancy since 2020?
I can't prescribe to a causation with a result of that. We can go back and we can look to see if we have those gaps like that that's contributing to it. But I would like to think through the reporting mechanism through parent school that parents would be analyzing the information saying, hey, I didn't approve for you to be out 10 times. How have you been absent?
I guess as follow-up to that, you wouldn't know if you've excused yourself. Like, you don't get the notice from Power School if you've excused your child or.
Well, actually, on the system, it shows absences and whether they're excused or
yeah.
not.
Oh, I
So,
see what you're saying.
When you look at the
You don't
report
get the
card,
alert, is what I mean.
don't get the alert.
You don't get like a push notification
Yeah.
that your child is absent. So,
Right.
but so we're looking at training people on procedures. We are not looking at revising our procedures to more accurately reflect what's going on in our buildings.
If necessary, yes. As gaps emerge, we want to make sure that we're flexible and we're mobile with that.
I'm curious, based on that question that Ashley made, very, very good point, and if parents don't have the time or don't have good systems in place, and you're looking at this AI system, if it could also include a notification your child was marked excused today. You know, and I would say with the AI versus the old way that I guess other people are still doing, the old way I was getting a phone call, a text, an email, like I was, and I realized I probably could have put some filters on there, but it was comically obnoxious. But this is just one text, you know, let me know what's going on, great. But can it be added that your child has been marked excused today? Simple as that.
Sam is nodding yes, so I'm going to say yes.
And I would say if that technology especially sticks around, that could be a way to make parents immediately aware to initiate that conversation and tackle that type of issue.
Brian?
I'm back at the question as to how come we haven't been referring truancy?
Because they hadn't gotten to that final step.
I would just intervene to say, I don't know that the train the trainers model is getting, well, it's like trickle-down leadership. It's not working because there are people doing these things in buildings every day, and there are faculty who have been told directly, we are not allowed to report truancy. So part of requesting the study session, which you can correct, I see you nodding, so I don't think that I'm wrong, is that in our experience representing specifically West, but as Brian's pointed out, this is not a niche issue, that people are told things that are very different in their school building than what we are hearing in this room. So other than just repeating what we're supposed to do, how do we actually provide effective oversight into making sure these things are being reported when applicable?
And I would say that's by monitoring our data. But keep in mind that with our new adjustment, with working with the department, getting people on board, we would like to start with the training portion to be able to say, hey, what was communicated? How's it housed? And then how are we being held accountable? So at least being able to say, we've trained everybody, starting at that point, then monitoring and holding people accountable.
Well, I think that's critical because I think that there is a disconnect somewhere, because I think that there are situations out there where individuals are being told, and they really are trying to do whatever they're being instructed the process is, and they get to where they think, okay, I've accomplished what I'm supposed to do, and then they're being told, well, no, you can't report it or whatever. So we need to have some sort of consistency across the district as to how we ensure that.
Christina, do we have this as part of our employee training, a subset on this policy, or it's, they have, I mean, employees are to read the policies every year.
Right.
And they attest to that.
Correct. I mean, is there a separate vector training on school attendance? No, there's not.
That's just what I was going to say. How about we put that, couldn't we do like a vector training?
We can certainly create one and then upload it into our vector
Does put extra
system.
burden on people is the one challenge
Well,
versus
that's
being
true. I mean,
provided
one more
professional
training that the
development
teacher
and
has to
training.
do, but that seems like, is there one that we could take off?
No, but Logan's hiding. Logan's already gets enough flack about how many are in our vector training each year. They're adding another one. But, I mean, we certainly could add another one so that we highlight all the main pieces and we can target the audience so it would go, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be in every year. It could be every other year,
Yeah.
or we can work on that. If that's something that's a board mandate or the superintendent says that she wants that.
I can say that I want that. I mean, I think you're unearthing, there's a disconnect in the information flow. We can address that, right? It's a board goal to attend to attendance and absenteeism and truancy. And we can sharpen the the information that gets out and how often it gets out and repeatedly gets out to people on how to manage attendance. It also does come down to everybody playing their role. I mean, if we look at it, the national absenteeism rate is 28%, which is just about, I think, at where we are in this. So everyone in the country is struggling with this right now. Truancy is its own special problem, but chronic absenteeism, I think, is a function of our culture having shifted its values in a way that downgrades education and the daily expectation that students are in school. I think there's also real social emotional issues around this and parenting struggles to get their kids to school and things. We have on our, every single web page in our system has at the bottom parent guidance, which parents can go to and pull up training and webinars through the Cook Center to get ideas on how to get their kids to school. I mean, there's lots of avenues that can be used to support this because it's all of us playing a role in getting this to happen. The teachers, the administrators, the district paying attention and providing the resources necessary. It just is such a big national problem that I don't want to underplay the cultural aspects of this and how our world has shifted this way. When I grew up and said I was sick, my mom said, you have to eat breakfast first. Get dressed, eat breakfast, and then we'll decide whether you go to school. There isn't that sort of attention to it now. The norms have shifted, and so we're fighting that as well in our schooling. I mean, part of it's about engaging instruction too, right? And trying to make sure kids want to show up so that they are self-motivated that way. I mean, there's so many pieces of this that I think we have to take it from all of those angles to make it happen better, but I appreciate that we're unearthing that there's a challenge in our system about the information people need.
And I think we're still obviously, our kids are still recovering from the trauma of COVID. Like the isolation and everything that happened. I mean, there's been so much trauma that's inflicted on our kids and even the adults that is playing into this as well.
I think that is part of the norms and culture too that have, yeah.
And I will say that to highlight that, Utah was one of the few states that actually did a truancy moratorium statute that went into effect. And, you know, it did take, I mean, there was a big push, you can't do this, right? And then all of a sudden it went away and there's still, I mean, I think the shift to go back to, you know, truancy is a big deal, this is what we're doing, especially understanding that kids are still suffering the effects of COVID and families, that there hasn't been the natural swing all the way back to where we were before the moratorium went into effect.
I want to kind of bring us back to the board goal.
I actually have one more question. Could we describe what resources are available when students are referred as habitual truant by the county or other providers?
I can compile a list and we can forward that information.
What are you thinking there, Ashley, that that's valuable for, that we share with teachers, or what are you thinking that?
I think
just
we
so
should
you
just
know, or?
No, we haven't referred anyone since 2020, and I think there's some lost knowledge about what it means. It doesn't mean you go to court and you suffer. When you go to truancy court, you receive specific supports that are related to compelling your attendance through, again, supports, not punitive measures only. And so I think people think of truancy for the reasons you stated as punitive, but it's my understanding there are resources available to students who are identified as truant under the law. And because we're not doing that, I don't know that anybody here knows what all of those resources are. And it would be helpful to identify why it is beneficial in some instances to actually report students as truant, where it's been seen as a gentler approach to just not report them at all, which is not necessarily helping anyone.
So a reframing of what that offers might help or induce people to follow through on pushing through toward truancy.
Just to know, I don't know what's offered. I mean, we haven't referred a student in 5 years. So in the last 5 years, we don't know what students receive by way of plans when they are referred. But our peers in other districts do seem to know that, and we're not necessarily benefiting from that information.
Well, and thanks, Ashley. And where I wanted to kind of loop us back to as to our board goal and kind of some of the progress that we've made since we adopted that. I know in the first year, there was a specific set of standards that we needed to meet, and I think hiring this person that you mentioned that starts in July, that we'll get back to some of those interventions, and then there's a 3-year kind of goal and then a 5-year goal. At least a set of goals and steps that we need to get ourselves to. I was looking for it in my emails, but I couldn't find it, unfortunately. But I'm just wondering what our progress might be towards that, and how are we incorporating what we've identified and adopted into these steps, if they need to be updated or reevaluated or what have you.
Can somebody share that with the new board members as well? We don't have, do you? I don't think the,
I'm sure I've got it somewhere in my materials, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Do you mean what's listed about attendance in the strategic plan or something
Exactly.
else? Because I think attendance is not actually really listed very directly in the strategic plan, which is why
Not
we
in the
made it a
strategic
goal.
plan as much. We need to add it into that. We were thinking of trying to embed it under one of the current pillars in our revised version, but that it is one of the board goals.
And I think you're referring to the board goals document that
Yeah,
has
yeah.
the 3-year and the 5-year steps.
Yep, that's what I'm referring to. Sorry, I got that mixed up.
And what are you thinking with that, Nate? Sorry.
Just like, what's our progress to it? You know, we adopted it, and where are we going with it?
Where are we on our goal?
I think just revisiting it would be good.
Right, I think so too. We just adopted it in December. And looking at those again, we're also creating a dashboard of those measures so the board can access that and see where we are at any time that we can put together so that has that public information accessible. Any of the things that we've got just a couple of minutes here?
Am I allowed to ask a question?
No, sorry. We'll call time.
Well, I have this question looking at the chart, so others may have it. Can you explain the difference between the absentee rate and the chronic absenteeism rate? Because just my mind says, why would chronic absenteeism rate be higher than absentee rate?
Okay.
And it might be, I'm just not understanding what the calculations are. So if you could maybe cover that?
Going back to the same thing again, in terms, I appreciate that question. When you look at chronic absenteeism, that's excused and unexcused together. Your absenteeism rate is just your unexcused absences. So it's the kids who have missed and the parents have not excused it, no information has been sent to the school, no valid reason. Chronic absenteeism, we've gone on family vacation, we're visiting somebody during the holidays and we want to stay an extra week, or school-related activities, you know, excused, the simple way is excused and unexcused versus just unexcused.
The absentee rate could be the precursor to the truancy issue.
Correct.
Yeah, and largely, I think that follows some of the conversation of absences are getting excused on an incredible rate, just to see the difference between those two graphs.
And I will say, the legislature keeps adding reasons for a valid excuse. Like this year, they added the participation in a rodeo.
That's right.
So each year, they do add more reasons why a student can have a valid excuse. So in this state, it would be likely that excused absences are going to go up because that seems to be where the culture is going.
So Christina, can I ask you along that line, has the legislature said that it's okay to, you've traveled outside of the country to see your family, and so you're going to be gone for a month?
I was going to ask the same question.
To add to that, that's why I think there's so much appetite that you're hearing for more than training about the procedures. Because no amount of telling someone what to do is helping schools actually respond. Like Brian's example is not a fiction. It is a real specific example, and you can't just go through a checklist and address that example. Like it doesn't work. And it especially doesn't work when it's happening at all tiers of schooling. I mean, there's not many here that are substantially different, there's very few outlier. I mean, Horizonte has the best attendance in the
Looks like it's
district.
doing well.
We have like a couple of small outliers here in terms of chronic absenteeism, but everyone else is really going through it, and I think it speaks to that.
And I'll just report a little bit from the JLC meeting this last Friday. Part of the discussion was asking the legislature to provide additional tools to LEAs to help address absenteeism.
Everybody's going through it. I think we've identified some things that can help our teams and schools and teachers, and I know they're frustrated because they're expected to help improve students' growth over the course of a year, and yet students aren't in class. So there is a recognition of what they face that way when so many students are missing huge chunks. And to have particularly a large class and try and catch up individuals is always a balancing act,
Thank you for
trying
raising
to get that going. Yeah, it's a really hard thing.
Incredibly hard.
Yeah. To try and reteach a lesson that your days past is one of the more frustrating things as a teacher to face. So these are big and important questions. I want it to be in the context of what the world is facing and but what we're trying to do this way. I think we're on track to do some things, particularly with these pilot programs that can make a difference. But they are going to take intensive resources to do it. I mean, it ends up being one-on-one relationships that often bring kids back to school. So the
Well, and that'll
it's
be-
resource heavy to do some of this work.
Sorry, one of the things that, from NSBA that I'll touch on is a piece that plays into what you just said, actually, that I was planning on covering, because it was one of the
Oh, good,
sessions I attended, which was very poignant.
about attendance.
More of the relationships and those connections with every single student in the building,
Yeah,
so.
it's becoming more and more critical. Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
We have 3 minutes left. Can I say one more thing? I just wanted to point out this underscores Bryce's past requests for us to review family and school collaboration costs, that we know one of the number one things we could do that addresses this, specifically in some of the schools with high rates, is to resume family and school collaboration practices. That,
One of the number one things we can do.
yeah. I mean, would we talk about, the second list here says, engage families and students. We had personnel who were doing exactly that.
Adding
And-
personnel to get
And
that
also
done.
helping in ways that are culturally responsive, which is what you're speaking to, is some of the challenge here. And we stopped doing that at those schools. And we not only stopped doing it, we didn't expand it. And by not expanding that particular resource, it seems like we're not putting resources to where some of these priorities are that we're training people on. So I just wanted to speak to his ongoing
Or we're not
request that we look
putting,
at that.
yeah, extra adults to be able to tackle that.
Well, can that be an upcoming study session? Really dissecting how that benefited in the past, what's changed since, really going through those
Yeah.
questions to analyze that as,
I think it's more a resource question.
well, would
Right
which
now,
would be part
then-
of the resource.
I mean,
would
it could be, I'm just
conversation.
trying to frame it as, it's not a question of whether or not an extra person there helping with family-school connections could be of value. The original program before I got here was deemed not to be working well enough to continue. So there was that decision made, but then we can look at this. This would be one of the things, as we've talked about, raising taxes possibly to fund some initiatives. This one would be at the top of the list of requests. This and some supports around school discipline and student behavior, those sorts of things come to the top of the list. So, I mean, that would be, I'm trying to frame it. I'm not sure that a study session about something that we all
Specifically.
agree, unless you want to just,
dive into it. And
Yeah.
like kind of what you're saying there is something that I've been chewing on is maybe another study session could be, is what are our top holes that staffing could help with? And then looking at our financial budget and figuring what we can do to shore up those holes, because I've heard stuff about coaches. And then, we've got this position, the never-ending conversation about paras and the part-time versus full-time, so we can stop having that turnover issue, which is an indirect cost, but it's still a real cost. And that if we can really like sit down and churn through what are our main chronic problems that we can fix through some staffing needs with the current budget, and then also in relation to the upcoming tax increase discussions, then that might be a way to kind of flush out where we can expand help in our buildings.
That's why I was wanting, and I found the document and the board goals document. I mean, one of the one-year strategies is to initiate family engagement strategies, including home visits and family education workshops, reaching 50% of families in high-risk categories. And so that takes people, and the resources and to help us get there, and so I think,
That's for attendance goals?
yeah, it's for our attendance goal. And so that's why I was hoping that we could kind of revisit this particular document and the goal that we adopted. Because I think there's some really, really good things there, maybe even some cross collaboration in what Bryce has requested in the past too. I think on that note, we've run out of time. Yes, we're adjourned.